Imagine walking into a place where reputation means nothing. No headlines, no cameras, no one whispering your name. Just a quiet room, and people who don't care who you are. Now imagine standing there while someone across the room decides to test you. Not because they know you, but because they don't. Moments like that reveal something interesting about human nature. In unfamiliar environments, people often measure each other in subtle ways. Not always through words. Sometimes through silence. Through posture. Through the way someone occupies space. And sometimes through intimidation. Now picture a situation like this involving Keanu Reeves. Not the celebrity people recognize from red carpets or interviews, but simply a person walking into an unexpected moment of tension. No fame advantage. No special treatment. Just another individual stepping into a room where the atmosphere suddenly feels different. You might think situations like this explode instantly, but in reality the most interesting moments often begin quietly. A glance that lingers a little longer than normal. A shift in someone's stance. A subtle challenge that isn't spoken out loud, but is clearly understood. And that's where this story really begins. Because moments like this are rarely about aggression. They're about pressure. The kind of pressure that reveals how someone responds when attention suddenly turns toward them. Do they react emotionally? Do they step back? Or do they remain completely calm? Many people know Keanu Reeves for his roles in intense action films like John Wick, where composure under pressure is part of the character. But what makes those performances interesting isn't just action. It's discipline. Control. The quiet confidence that appears before anything dramatic ever happens. And that's exactly why a scenario like this becomes fascinating. Because when someone expects a reaction, but gets calm silence instead, something unusual begins to unfold. You see, intimidation often relies on one simple thing. The expectation that the other person will lose control. Raise their voice. Make a mistake. React too quickly. But when that reaction never comes, the entire dynamic begins to shift. And that's the moment where people watching, whether in the room or later online, start asking questions. What happens when pressure meets patience? What happens when someone refuses to play the game everyone else expects? And most importantly, what happens when the calmest person in the room turns out to be the one in complete control? Because sometimes the most powerful response in a tense situation is doing absolutely nothing at all. And in the next moment of this story, something subtle happens that changes the entire atmosphere of the room. Before anything dramatic happens, it's important to understand something about environments where tension quietly builds. Most people imagine pressure as something loud. Arguments, raised voices, sudden confrontation. But in reality, the most uncomfortable situations are often much quieter than that. They begin with observation. People watching each other. Trying to read intentions. Trying to understand who feels confident and who doesn't. In unfamiliar places, small signals become important. A person's posture, their breathing, how quickly they react to unexpected attention. Sometimes these moments are almost invisible to outsiders. Yet everyone inside the room feels the shift immediately. Imagine a setting where several people are present, each carrying their own expectations about how others should behave. In these environments, someone occasionally decides to test the atmosphere. Not necessarily through aggression, but through presence. Standing slightly closer than expected. Holding eye contact a little longer than normal. Waiting to see if the other person becomes uncomfortable. It's a subtle psychological test. And this is where the scenario involving Keanu Reeves becomes interesting. Because the situation isn't about physical strength. It's about composure. Many viewers recognize Keanu Reeves from films that require intense preparation, particularly the John Wick series. For those roles, he spent months training in areas like choreography, movement coordination, and weapons handling designed specifically for cinematic action scenes. But what often stands out in interviews isn't the action itself. It's the discipline behind the preparation. Actors working on demanding roles frequently describe how training builds something beyond physical ability. It builds patience, focus, awareness of surroundings. These qualities matter in storytelling because they reflect something many people overlook. Calm behavior under pressure is rarely accidental. It's usually the result of experience, preparation, and self-control. Now imagine returning to that quiet room again. The atmosphere hasn't changed much on the surface. Conversations remain low. People continue what they were doing. But attention has shifted slightly. Someone has decided to test the moment. Not dramatically, just enough to see what happens. And when situations like this unfold, people generally respond in predictable ways. Some try to prove themselves immediately. Others become defensive. Some laugh nervously or try to avoid eye contact. But occasionally, someone responds differently. They don't escalate. They don't retreat. They simply remain present. That kind of calm response can be confusing for people expecting a completely different reaction. Because intimidation, whether subtle or obvious, often relies on one assumption. The assumption that pressure will create visible discomfort. But when someone stands there quietly, breathing evenly, observing carefully, the entire tone of the situation changes. The room becomes more attentive. People begin noticing details they might have ignored before. How steady someone's posture is. How controlled their movements appear. How little energy they spend reacting. Moments like this are fascinating because they reveal something deeper about human interaction. Confidence doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appears through stillness, through patience, through the ability to remain calm when attention suddenly focuses on you. And in situations where people expect tension to grow quickly, a calm response can feel almost unexpected. That's the point where observers start realizing something important. This situation may not unfold the way they first imagined, because the person being tested isn't showing signs of pressure. Instead, they're quietly studying the moment, watching, waiting, understanding exactly what's happening. And as that awareness becomes clearer, the atmosphere in the room slowly begins to shift, not through force, not through confrontation, but through something much more subtle. The realization that the person everyone expected to react might actually be the most composed person there. The room didn't suddenly become louder. If anything, it became quieter. Moments like this have a strange effect on people. Conversations continue, but they slow slightly. Voices lower without anyone realizing it. Attention begins drifting toward the center of the room. Not because something dramatic has happened yet, but because everyone senses that something might. The tension isn't explosive. It's measured. Across the room, someone shifts their weight forward just a little. Not aggressive enough to start an argument, but noticeable enough to signal intention. It's the kind of subtle move people make when they want to test the space around them. A silent question. How will the other person respond? Most people react immediately in situations like this. They step back. They speak first. They try to break the tension before it grows uncomfortable. But the interesting thing about this moment is that the reaction everyone expects never comes. Instead, Keanu Reeves remains exactly where he is. No sudden movement. No defensive posture. Just calm observation. His breathing stays slow and steady. His shoulders remain relaxed. And his attention appears focused, not on reacting, but on understanding the situation. This kind of composure can feel unusual to people who rely on quick reactions. Because tension often feeds on emotional responses. Raise your voice, and someone raises theirs louder. Step forward, and someone steps forward faster. But when that chain reaction doesn't happen, the rhythm of the situation changes. The person who initiated the silent test pauses slightly. It's almost invisible, but people nearby notice it. There's a brief hesitation. Not confusion exactly. More like recalculation. Because the expected response never arrived. Observers in the room start noticing other details now. The distance between both individuals. The steady pace of breathing. The calm expression that hasn't changed since the moment began. This kind of stillness can be surprisingly powerful. It sends a message without saying anything. It suggests awareness, control, patience. And sometimes that message travels faster through a room than words ever could. People watching quietly begin forming their own interpretations. Some assume confidence. Others assume experience. Some simply recognize that the situation feels different now. Meanwhile, the tension hasn't disappeared. It has simply transformed. Instead of growing louder or more aggressive, it becomes focused. Every movement carries more meaning. A slight turn of the head. A shift in posture. Even the smallest step can suddenly feel significant. For someone familiar with performance training, like the kind Keanu Reeves practiced while preparing for films such as John Wick, awareness of body language becomes second nature. Actors working on demanding roles often train to control movement with precision. Not just during action scenes, but during moments of silence. Moments where presence alone tells part of the story. And that's exactly what seems to be happening here. No one raises their voice. No one makes a sudden move. Yet everyone can feel the shift taking place. The original challenge, small and subtle as it was, no longer feels as certain as it did before. Because intimidation often depends on momentum. It grows stronger when reactions come quickly. But when calm patience interrupts that momentum, something unexpected happens. The situation slows down. People start thinking instead of reacting. And the person who initiated the tension now faces a new decision. Continue pushing forward. Or recognize that the atmosphere has already changed. From the outside, it may look like nothing has happened at all. Just two individuals standing in the same room. But anyone paying close attention can feel it. The balance in the space has quietly shifted. Not through force. Not through confrontation. But through something far more subtle. Composure. And in moments like this, composure can be the most powerful signal of all. Because when one person refuses to rush, everyone else in the room is forced to slow down with them. And that's when the situation begins moving toward its most unexpected turning point. At first glance, nothing dramatic happens. No raised voices. No sudden confrontation. Just a quiet room where the tension has slowly reached its highest point. And sometimes, that's exactly when the smallest change becomes the most important one. The person who initiated the silent test takes a small step. Not aggressive. Not careless. Just slightly closer than before. It's the kind of movement designed to see whether the other person will react. Most people would respond instantly to something like that. They might step back. They might speak. They might try to break the tension with a joke or a quick comment. But once again, the reaction everyone expects doesn't happen. Keanu Reeves remains calm. His posture doesn't stiffen. His breathing doesn't change. Instead, he makes a movement so subtle that many people almost miss it. A small adjustment. One foot shifts slightly to the side. Not retreating. Not advancing. Just repositioning. But that small change quietly alters the space between them. Suddenly the distance feels different. Balanced. Controlled. Observers nearby might not understand exactly what changed, but they feel it immediately. The moment that once seemed uncertain now feels steady. That's the interesting thing about composure. It doesn't need dramatic gestures to become visible. Sometimes it appears through tiny adjustments that signal awareness. And awareness changes everything. Because when someone shows they are fully aware of their surroundings, the entire tone of a situation begins to shift. The person who stepped forward pauses again. Not out of fear, but because the atmosphere has changed in a way that's difficult to ignore. The silent pressure they created no longer carries the same energy. Moments earlier, the tension felt like it might grow. Now it feels like it has reached a natural boundary. And that boundary wasn't created through aggression. It was created through control. Many people associate strength with loud reactions or dramatic gestures. But real discipline often looks completely different. It looks like patience, like measured breathing, like someone choosing exactly when and how to move. Actors who prepare for demanding film roles sometimes talk about this kind of training. For projects like John Wick, performers including Keanu Reeves spent months practicing movement awareness and timing for choreographed scenes. Not just fast action, but controlled motion. Learning how even small shifts in balance can change the energy of a moment. Of course, real life isn't a film set, but the idea behind that training still applies. Awareness often prevents situations from escalating in the first place. And that seems to be exactly what is happening here. The room is still quiet, but the tension that once felt unpredictable has transformed into something calmer. People watching from nearby begin to relax slightly. Some return to their conversations. Others glance back briefly, curious to see what happens next. But the moment that once seemed like the beginning of a confrontation now feels different. It feels resolved. Not through dominance. Not through victory. But through understanding. The unspoken message has already been delivered. This situation doesn't need to go any further. And interestingly, the person who initiated the silent challenge appears to understand that as well. There's no dramatic ending. No sudden announcement. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the atmosphere has shifted. The small step forward that once carried tension no longer holds the same meaning. Now it's just space. Two individuals standing in the same room. Nothing more. But the lesson hidden inside the moment remains clear. Because what just happened wasn't about proving strength. It was about demonstrating control. And control often speaks the loudest when it appears in the smallest ways. A steady breath. A relaxed posture. A simple adjustment that changes the balance of a room. People sometimes expect powerful moments to look dramatic. But often the most powerful moments are the quiet ones. The moments where someone chooses patience instead of reaction. Calm instead of conflict. Awareness instead of ego. And in this situation, that choice quietly transformed what could have become tension into something much more interesting. A reminder that the strongest response in a difficult moment isn't always the one people expect. Sometimes it's simply the ability to remain calm. until the entire situation changes on its own. If a moment like this ever appeared online, the reaction would be immediate. Clips would start circulating within minutes. Short edits. Zoomed-in frames. Dramatic background music added by someone who wasn't even in the room. And before long, the internet would begin doing what it always does. Turning a quiet moment into a loud debate. People would replay the scene again and again, trying to analyze every tiny movement. Someone would point out the step forward. Another person would slow the video down to focus on the subtle shift in posture. A third viewer might highlight the calm breathing and say that was the real turning point. But despite all the different observations, the comments section would quickly fill with the same question. Who won? It's almost automatic. Online audiences often look at situations like this through the lens of competition. Someone must dominate. Someone must lose. There has to be a clear outcome. But moments like the one involving Keanu Reeves don't really fit into that kind of simple narrative. Because nothing about the situation was designed to create a winner or a loser. It was simply a moment of pressure. And pressure reveals how people respond when attention suddenly focuses on them. The interesting part is that online viewers rarely see the full picture. They see a short clip. 10 seconds. Maybe 20. But what they miss is the atmosphere leading up to that moment. The quiet observation. The subtle signals. The shift in energy that people inside the room could feel but a camera might barely capture. That missing context changes everything. Without it, the story becomes simplified. One person steps forward. Another person remains calm. And suddenly the internet tries to turn that into a dramatic showdown. But the truth is far more interesting than that. Because the real focus of the moment wasn't competition. It was discipline. People often talk about discipline as if it only matters during extreme situations. During intense training. During high-stakes events. But in reality, discipline is most visible during small everyday moments. Moments where someone could react emotionally, but chooses not to. Moments where pressure appears, and patience quietly replaces it. For actors who prepare for demanding roles, like the kind Keanu Reeves experienced while working on films such as John Wick, discipline becomes part of the process. Training for cinematic action sequences requires focus, repetition, and a deep understanding of movement. But the most interesting part of that preparation isn't the action itself. It's the mindset behind it. The ability to stay composed. To observe before reacting. To understand the energy of a moment rather than rushing to control it. That mindset can appear in unexpected places. Not just on a film set. But in ordinary situations where people test each other without even realizing it. The internet, however, rarely focuses on that deeper lesson. It prefers clear outcomes. Clear winners. Clear dramatic endings. So if this moment ever appeared online, the debate would probably continue for days. Some viewers would insist the calm response was a sign of quiet confidence. Others might argue that nothing significant happened at all. A few might try to invent dramatic explanations that were never actually part of the situation. And slowly, the original moment, the quiet shift in atmosphere, would become something completely different. A viral clip. A dramatic headline. A simplified story that misses the real point entirely. But here's the interesting thing. The people who were actually present in the room would likely remember the moment very differently. Not as a confrontation. Not as a contest. But as a quiet demonstration of composure. They would remember the silence. The subtle movement. The realization that tension doesn't always grow louder. Sometimes it dissolves the moment someone refuses to feed it. That's the kind of detail that rarely appears in online discussions. Because calm decisions aren't always dramatic. They don't produce explosive endings or viral sound bites. But they do reveal something important about human behavior. When people expect conflict, calmness becomes surprising. When people expect ego, patience becomes powerful. And when people expect someone to react emotionally, the choice to remain composed can quietly change the entire situation. So while the internet might keep asking the same question, who won? The people who understand moments like this see it differently. Because the point was never about winning. It was about control. Control of emotions. Control of reactions. Control of the energy inside a tense situation. And in many ways, that kind of control is far more impressive than any dramatic outcome the internet could invent. Because the strongest response in a moment of pressure isn't always the one that creates the loudest story. Sometimes it's the one that ends the tension before a story even needs to begin. By now, the room has returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations continue. People move about their business. The tension that once filled the space has quietly disappeared. From the outside, it may seem like nothing significant happened at all. No dramatic confrontation. No loud conclusion. Just a moment that arrived, and then slowly faded away. But sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones that leave behind a quiet lesson. Because what happened in that room wasn't really about a challenge. It wasn't about proving strength. And it certainly wasn't about dominating someone else. It was about something much more subtle. Control. The kind of control that doesn't come from physical power or loud confidence. The kind that comes from understanding your own reactions. Most people believe strength shows itself through action. Through quick responses. Through the ability to push back when pressure appears. But real discipline often looks completely different. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like someone standing perfectly still while everyone else expects them to react. Moments like this remind us of something simple about human behavior. Pressure often creates two choices. The first is the one people expect. React immediately. Prove something. Escalate the situation. The second choice is much harder. Pause. Observe. And decide whether the situation even deserves a reaction at all. That second choice requires something most people rarely practice. Emotional control. For someone like Keanu Reeves, whose career includes demanding film roles such as John Wick, preparation and discipline have always been important parts of the craft. Actors performing physically demanding scenes often train for months to coordinate movement, timing, and focus. But beyond the choreography, that training builds something deeper. Awareness. The ability to stay present in stressful situations. The ability to remain calm while everything around you feels intense. And even though this story is fictional, the lesson behind it reflects something very real about how people handle pressure. Because moments like this don't just happen in dramatic settings. They happen in everyday life. At work. During disagreements. In situations where someone challenges your patience or tries to provoke a reaction. Think about your own experiences for a moment. When was the last time someone expected you to react emotionally? Maybe during an argument. Maybe during a stressful day when everything seemed to demand an immediate response. Most people feel the urge to react quickly in those moments. To defend themselves. To raise their voice. To prove a point. But occasionally someone makes a different choice. They pause. They breathe. And instead of feeding the tension, they allow it to fade. That choice doesn't always feel dramatic in the moment. In fact, it often feels quiet and almost invisible. But over time, it reveals something powerful about discipline. Because discipline isn't just about physical training or professional success. It's about mastering your own reactions. Understanding when to engage. And when to simply let a moment pass. That's what made the earlier situation so interesting. Not the challenge. Not the tension. But the response. Or rather, the lack of one. The calm decision to remain steady while the atmosphere around the moment slowly shifted. Many people spend years trying to prove their strength to others. But real strength rarely needs that kind of demonstration. It appears through consistency. Through composure. Through the ability to remain calm when everyone else expects the opposite. And that's why moments like this stay with people long after they end. Because they reveal something we often forget. The loudest reaction isn't always the strongest one. Sometimes the strongest reaction is restraint. The ability to step back mentally and recognize that not every challenge deserves your energy. Not every tense moment deserves a dramatic response. And not every situation requires someone to win. Sometimes the most powerful outcome is simply maintaining control of yourself. Allowing the situation to resolve naturally. And walking away with your composure completely intact. That's a lesson many people only learn after years of experience. But once you understand it, you begin to see situations differently. You stop measuring strength by who speaks the loudest. Or who reacts the fastest. Instead, you start noticing the quieter signals. The steady breathing. The relaxed posture. The calm confidence of someone who doesn't feel the need to prove anything at all. And in many ways, that kind of confidence speaks louder than any dramatic reaction ever could. Because real discipline doesn't depend on an audience. It exists whether people are watching or not. And the individuals who truly understand that are often the calmest people in the room when pressure finally arrives. By the time the moment is over, most people in the room have already returned to their normal routines. Chairs move slightly. Conversations resume. Someone laughs at something happening on the other side of the room. From a distance, nothing about the situation would appear unusual anymore. Yet the people who noticed the earlier tension understand that something meaningful just happened. Not a confrontation. Not a victory. But a quiet demonstration of control. Moments like this rarely make headlines. They don't produce dramatic footage or explosive endings. but they often leave behind a stronger impression than louder events ever could. Because what people witnessed wasn't someone trying to dominate a situation. It was someone choosing not to. And that choice carries a lesson many people overlook. Throughout life, individuals constantly encounter situations where they feel tested. Sometimes the test is obvious. A disagreement, a challenge, a moment where someone expects you to react emotionally. Other times the test is far more subtle. A small comment meant to provoke a response. A shift in tone during a conversation. A quiet attempt to see how much pressure someone can handle before they lose patience. In those moments, people usually believe they have only one option. Respond immediately. Defend themselves. Prove that they won't be pushed around. But occasionally, someone recognizes a second option. A calmer one. The option to pause. To breathe. To understand the situation before reacting to it. That kind of response requires discipline. And discipline isn't always easy. It demands self-awareness. It demands patience. And most importantly, it demands the ability to separate ego from action. Because ego often tells us that every challenge must be answered. That every moment of tension must be resolved with strength or authority. But real maturity reveals something different. Not every situation deserves your energy. Not every moment of tension requires a dramatic response. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is remain completely calm. People often admire public figures like Keanu Reeves because of the characters they portray on screen. Films such as John Wick show intense scenes of focus, determination, and control under pressure. But the reason those characters resonate with audiences isn't just because of action. It's because of the mindset behind it. The idea that discipline begins long before any dramatic moment appears. The idea that true confidence doesn't need to be loud. In many ways, the earlier situation in this story reflects that same principle. A moment of pressure appeared. Someone tested the atmosphere. And instead of reacting emotionally, the response remained calm and measured. That calm response quietly changed the entire dynamic. Because when someone refuses to react the way people expect, the energy of the situation shifts. Tension loses momentum. The desire to provoke fades. And what could have become conflict simply dissolves. This is a lesson that extends far beyond a single moment in a room. It applies to everyday life in ways people rarely notice. Think about stressful situations most people face regularly. Workplace disagreements. Family arguments. Unexpected challenges that appear without warning. In those moments, emotions often rise quickly. Voices become louder. Decisions become rushed. And before anyone realizes it, the situation has escalated far beyond where it began. But occasionally, someone interrupts that pattern. They slow down the moment. They choose patience instead of reaction. They refuse to let tension dictate their behavior. That choice may seem small at first, but its impact can be enormous, because calmness has a surprising effect on the people around it. When one person remains steady, others often begin to mirror that energy. The atmosphere softens. The pressure fades. And the situation resolves without anyone needing to prove anything. That's why the earlier moment was never really about a challenge. It was about awareness. The awareness to recognize what was happening. The awareness to understand that reacting emotionally would only add fuel to the tension. And the awareness to choose composure instead. Many people spend years trying to build strength in obvious ways. They focus on competition. On proving themselves. On demonstrating power whenever they feel challenged. But real strength often looks very different. It appears through restraint. Through patience. Through the ability to remain calm even when pressure invites a reaction. And when someone develops that kind of discipline, something interesting happens. They stop feeling the need to win every moment. They stop viewing every challenge as a battle. Instead, they begin recognizing that the most powerful outcome is often the quietest one. The moment where tension fades without conflict. The moment where ego steps aside and awareness takes control. The moment where composure becomes the strongest response in the room. And that's why the earlier situation carries a lesson worth remembering. Because the strongest person in the room isn't always the one who speaks the loudest. It isn't the one who reacts the fastest. And it certainly isn't the one who turns every moment into a competition. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is simply the one who doesn't need to prove anything at all. The one who remains calm. The one who understands the power of patience. The one who recognizes that real confidence doesn't depend on winning. It depends on knowing when a situation no longer deserves your energy. And when you understand that lesson, you begin seeing strength in a completely different way. Not as something loud or dramatic, but as something quiet, steady, and deeply controlled. So if this story changed the way you think about strength, even slightly, then you've already discovered the real message behind it. Because sometimes the greatest display of power is the decision not to use it.